Tahmina Watson. Wow, what a pleasure talking to Tahmina. She's an immigration lawyer. She's much more than that, but her main focus, her authorship, she's written books, 3 books, podcasts on immigration, and it's such a hot button topic in the United States. It's political. There's so much misconception. There's so much false information that's happening. She does a real good job of breaking it down into 3 major categories: family, business, and then what she calls humanitarian humanitarianism. Human, humanitarianism. And really great conversation. She's also a bird watcher. She's a blogger. She's a mother of 2. She met her husband on a blind date. She's from the UK. She came over. She had to take the bar in New York. She's in Washington State. It's just really, really great talking to someone who exemplifies discipline, by the way, and her connection to it is intention, which is a really interesting kind of angle on discipline. But really love the discussion about immigration. I got a lot of things, misconceptions that I had cleared up. My parents are not from the United States. We are a country of immigrants, and it was a great perspective. Tahmina Watson, thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business that lasted over 25 years? Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission: how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family, in their passion, in their careers, and how it helped them. Our podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. Now, Tahmina Watson, thank you so much for your time today. Why is immigration such a hot topic, political topic? We are a country of immigrants. My parents are not from this country. Why is it such a big issue?
Well, Joey, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And I did read your bio, and I'm so glad that I read that your parents are immigrants. So you know why this is important. This nation was built by immigrants. If you think about, how this country began and how everything in this country had really sort of grown and become this developed nation, it all happened because of immigrants. And what happens in this modern day is that people forget history. People become selfish, and that all, results in divisiveness.
That's really unfortunate because, I mean, there's no true kind of American last names. It's all European, it's all African, it's all South American, it's all Asian. It's just a true melting pot. And people really, really politicize it. Now, so you're in the Northwest, you're in Seattle, you are an immigration lawyer. And by the way, that's just top of the scale: bird watcher, podcaster, author, mother of 2 girls. I mean, the list goes on and on. Very impressive woman. But let's talk about immigration a little bit more, in that there's like 3 types of immigration. I never really talked to my parents about what it was like. They didn't come through Ellis Island. They met in New York City, but they didn't go through Ellis Island. They had relatives here previously. But let's just talk about the process of immigration. There's so many misconceptions.
So true, and I'm so glad that you mentioned three types. There are many types, but what I try to describe to people, just so that this complex system could be simplified to some extent, I say to people there are three big buckets. There is the family-based bucket, there is the employment-based bucket,
Hmm.
and then there is the humanitarian bucket. And within these buckets, there are many different types. But if people could keep these three headings in their minds, whatever they hear about on television or in the news will fall into one of these. So, what are they? So, the family based immigration is when you just mentioned your parents, it's when family members are sponsoring each other. And that's parents, children, siblings. And one of the misconceptions on this issue, particularly in the last several years, was that you can sponsor your aunt and your grandfather and your grandmother and all these other people,
Hmm.
everybody in your family. That is not true. You can only sponsor immediate family members, and so that is parents, siblings, children. um, but what happens in that, though, is that they become different categories, and how long you wait will depend
Oh.
on where that relationship is. And I'll come and describe something else to that, but it's relevant in the employment based situation as well. So, the employment based immigration category is when an employer is sponsoring somebody for a job. And it could be a scientist, it could be
Hmm.
an Emmy award winning actor, it could be somebody who is, it could be anything, architect, doctor, lawyer, you name it. Whatever the profession, nursing home, they can sponsor people for green cards. But there is a very complicated, tedious, expensive, frustrating system that is behind that. But in this bucket, there are different categories, and how you apply will depend on the category. And this is where I want to ask your listeners to envision a dartboard. The dartboard is a symbol of how
Hmm.
many visas are given out each year. So there is a number that is associated with it, and it is written in the law. For family based, it's 226,000 visas or green cards. Visas and green cards are sort of used synonymously, if you like. So you will hear visas for temporary, permission to come here, or permanent uh, permission to come here. And in this context, visa means green card. So 226,000 at a minimum. And then for employment based, it's 140,000 a year that's given out. And they all start in October 1st, when the fiscal year begins. But this dartboard is important for people to envision, because at the center where the bullseye is, that's
Ah.
where people are not waiting very much. So in the family based, it's when it's an immediate relative, meaning that it's a spouse or a parent or a minor child. They're in the bullseye. You're not waiting
Wow.
longer than it takes for the process to finish, meaning that somebody is going to get to your file. Um, in the employment based situation, the bullseye is people who are in the what's called EB, employment based first preference, meaning that they are Nobel Prize winners, they are outstanding researchers, and it could be anybody who has reached the top of their profession. They're in the center, they're not waiting that long, other than how long it takes for the file to reach from step 1 to step 10. But these outer skirts of the dartboard is how those relationships are getting
Hmm.
further and further, and that's how long people have to wait. It's not just about somebody pushing the file anymore, it's that when can that file be pushed. And all of these outer circles of the dartboard signify where you are in this preference categories. But that dartboard is also important to describe which country are you from, which category are you in. So if you think about just the pie chart of the dartboard, there are like little segments. Those segments will define which country you're from and which category you're from. If you're from India, you're going to be waiting a long
What?
time, meaning decades. If you're from England, you may not be waiting that much time. And so it's these little pie charts and the little segments. Each country in the world is given 7% of these 140 or 226. And so that number gets, the supply is
Hmm.
much smaller than the demand. And so that waiting time, so that's as simple as I can make it. It's very, very complicated, but where you are in that dartboard or that pie chart will
Now, why is
define how
India
long you're
more
waiting.
time than England? Population.
Because the country is much larger, so the population that is waiting to come in, it's they still have
Ah.
7%, just like England has 7%. Norway has 7%. Timbuktu, if we were making up countries at this point, everybody has 7%. But how many people are trying to come here will define how long that line is. So if you hear the word line, it's really that, how many people are in that pie chart in that little segment, and
So the
that's how long they're
largest
waiting.
population countries, India, China, Mexico. So these countries still only are given 7%. Very interesting. I remember you
Mhm.
talking about that.
That's correct.
Sorry.
And these laws, yeah, and the law was set in,
Huh.
with the laws are from 1990. And think about how globalization and technology has made the world
Hmm.
change many, many fold over. But the law hasn't changed. And so when you hear about immigration reform on television or the news or podcasts, it's really important to understand that the law that we are dealing with is so archaic and so old that it doesn't meet the needs of the modern day world that we live in. And it's not just about America. America is part of a global community. And people, we are relying on immigrants. Your first question was
Yeah.
so important. Why are immigrants important? If you think about just the pandemic,
Yeah.
who kept everything going? If you go to the grocery store, the apples on
Hmm.
the shiny apples that still were shiny were in the grocery store because some immigrant was picking it. If you think about the phone that you were using, the hardware, the software, the network, majority of that is being manned by people who are immigrants. And so COVID-19 is a great
Hmm.
example for showing what the healthcare industry does. They rely on immigrant doctors, nurses, medical professionals, you name it. We need immigrants in every industry. And the immigration system hasn't changed to meet our
So if
economic
if
needs.
I were to give you, complete control, and I do have this power, by the way, but no, I'm kidding. If I gave you complete control, what, how
I'll
would you
take it.
change the law? What would you do with the law? What would you do to improve it?
I think about this often, so I'm so
Yes.
glad you're giving this, fictitious power to me. But I would really rejig things. And yes, this is a
Hmm.
very complicated system. So one person would not necessarily be able to change it and meet so many needs. But what I would want people to know is if we can make the
Hmm.
economy our guiding star, I think that could result in these changes meeting the needs that we have. If we can keep when in 1990 and 1950s and 60s when these laws were changed, they were done primarily with family unity in mind. And families are very important, there's no question. We need to not necessarily make too many changes in the categories we have. But the systemic change that we need really needs to have an eye on the economy. If we think about today, I mean, I don't, Joey, I was listening to you speaking to this business expert earlier. You know,
Right.
most businesses don't have labor. You don't, whichever industry you're looking at, if it's a fast food chain, if it's a hospital, even law firms, staffing is a
Hmm.
big issue. Where are we going to get these people? Yeah, without having staff running these businesses, we're not necessarily having the economy revived. We're going into a recession. I mean, some people
Hmm.
are like on the fence. Are we in a recession? Are we not in a recession? We're clearly in a recession, or if we're not, we're very quickly. And so if I had to pick three things, because I have noticed often that you don't get everything you want. And when you're compromising in very difficult situations, you've got to have your top list. My top list would include, and of course, I could probably go on, but I'm going to try to stop at five, maybe. One is, you hear about people who are undocumented. There are 11 million of them. That becomes one of the biggest, the critical conversation that people have, and it's the most divisive issue. We don't want to give
Right.
amnesty. The reason these people are here is because in 1996, a new law was created saying if you come into the US without status, or you remain without status for 6 months or more, if you leave the country, you cannot come back for 3 years.
Wow.
And if you're here for 12 months or more without status, you cannot come back for 10 years. What this did, and
Hmm.
every law, maybe at the time it made sense, it had, unintended consequences. These people suddenly became trapped. If they leave the country, they have families, they have other commitments, many things, primarily mixed status families, they cannot come back. So when you hear, lots of news stories and politicians talking, get back in the line and come back legally, there is no line, quote unquote line, but there is no mechanism for them to come back. A person cannot be outside the country for 10 plus years when they have little children and family members and spouses and what
Wow.
have you. So my first thing would be to remove the 3 and 10 year bar, because that will, if I were given just a handful of choices, that would actually impact a very large portion of the people affected that need
Hmm.
assistance. And that could solve the economy too. Once you have them, people who are legally here with green cards and they can work in any industry, so economy is the lens here again. Um, we need a low skilled visa category. We do not have one. The number of times that I speak with people on a weekly basis, from fast food restaurants, just general restaurants, construction companies, nursing homes, and nursing homes play a huge part in our medical ecosystem. These are people who are in hospice, but often they don't have, or the Medicaid or what have you, they have to find a way to get the assistance. These homes are often operated by Americans, but often by immigrants too. But the work that needs to happen, even pre-pandemic, was difficult, and you couldn't find
Hmm.
people. So a low skilled visa category that basically says your expertise in X, or you can provide, hard labor, we will
Hmm.
take you. We don't have that. What we have is seasonal visas and agricultural visas. And even though they're quote unquote low skill, there's nothing low skill about it. Those don't fit the person who's trying to fill a waitress or a nursing home position. This happens often. I think I've given the best examples, but it happens in every
Hmm.
industry. And this is a time in our country, but also globally, where people are facing staff shortages. And sometimes I think, where are the people? But wherever they are, they're not doing the work. And again, economy as the lens. If we could fix that, we would actually be able to revitalize the economy as we head into a recession.
Hmm.
There are many other things that I would put on my list, but if I had to put a third one, that would be the startup visa, a visa for founders who are creating solutions to chronic problems. And this is the moment where I can
Yes.
show you my.
Yes.
I have spent so much time, working with people advocating for a visa for founders who can't stay in this country because our the modern day business formation doesn't fit the 1990s laws that we have. In 1990 and beyond, before, it wasn't contemplated that, you know, venture capital funding or angel funding, or people would use funding from research and awards to create a company. In those days, the very traditional way was you put money in a company and that's your company. But the modern day system is not taken into account. Now, we had our first bill in Congress in 2009, and since then, we've had many, many different bills, but it has not become
Hmm.
law. Whereas Canada took our startup visa bill from 2009, 10, and they made it their own. And they are an attractive place for entrepreneurs to go and start their companies and create jobs. Canada is a great example to show as what they think of immigration. Immigration to them is truly an economic
Hmm.
tool. They're welcoming in humanitarian situations, but every humanitarian, situation that results in more immigrants, it's also helping the economy. Now, we didn't talk about the third bucket. The third bucket is humanitarian visas. That is refugees, asylum, U visas, people who are victims of a crime, people who are, there is the S visa, often colloquially sort of called snitch visa, if you are, helping police and
Uh,
the authorities in finding somebody, you can get an S visa. There is the T visa, trafficking visa, if you've been trafficked for whatever reason. Those are in that bucket. But and it's a very complicated bucket because each of these different visas have different issues and requirements and problems that need to be solved. Asylum, I haven't talked about removal as a subject matter, deportation, that goes into court. All of these three buckets, these people can end up
hmm.
in court. So that's a systemic issue that needs reform in and of itself. But where people get hung up on is the border, and the border, it needs a reform, of course, but it needs to have sensible modern day solutions. A wall is not going to be the
Hmm.
solution. A wall is a great way to appropriate funds and have the visibility of doing something, but it doesn't accomplish the result. And what the answer is, I don't have a good one for you necessarily, but it does involve technology, and other ways of improving the system as a whole. But that's where we land on why we need immigration reform. The other thing I will mention, before I just stop talking about immigration reform, is that often, the rhetoric becomes, do we do a comprehensive
Hmm.
immigration reform, or do we do piecemeal? Do we fix this asylum? Do we fix this U visa? Do we fix border? Do we fix one or the other? Shall we fix one thing? The trouble is, everything is connected.
Hmm.
Think about the dartboard, how everything is connected. If you do not, the ankle bone is connected to the knee bone, that's connected to the hip bone. If you fix just one thing, you're going to make everything lopsided
Right.
in a different way. And so that's why comprehensive immigration reform is so essential.
Yeah, I think a great example of that is we saw in the healthcare. I mean, we've it needed big reform. We did a lot of things. We got some pieces together, and now some parts are doing well, and some parts are not. One thing that I heard you talk about, and we need to talk about, of course, is the whole they're taking our jobs and how that's a myth.
Absolutely. And it was never more true or visible as it has been now.
Right.
I think before COVID, there was maybe doubt. It's one person's, voice against the other, or one party's voice against the other. But COVID has exposed the
Hmm.
myth. And so it is definitely not, it never was true, but it is exposed as a myth now.
Now, when someone comes to your law firm, you're a lawyer. When I first heard you speak, I could have sworn you're from New Jersey, and I was shocked to learn London. But that's just a joke, Tamina. But but
I was like, oh my gosh, my friends are so right that I sound like an American now.
so you came to the country. You were on a blind date. You met your husband. It's a very very amusing story. And you did the bar in New York and in Washington State. So now you've got this great law firm. You're on many different medias. You're an advocate, obviously, for immigration. When somebody comes to you in the law firm, are they seeking asylum? Do they want their families to come across? Are they like what is a common case that people come to you with?
Yes, and such a great question. For first of all, thank you so much for sharing the Sleepless in Seattle story a little
Yes.
bit. It's one of my favorites. I feel so grateful that life has unfolded in the way it has. I'm a business immigration attorney. That means that second bucket we talked about, that's what I primarily do. I also help people with the first bucket of the family-based issues. What I don't do is most of the things in the third
Mm.
bucket of humanitarian at my law firm directly. However, that third bucket is what my passion
Mm.
in the sense that I want to help people. People are everything in this world. We are all connected. How do we make things better for them? So I put in a lot of pro bono time in making sure that people with humanitarian needs are getting their needs met. And so at my law firm, it's business immigration, the employer, employee, founders, investors. How do they come and start their companies here? And family members that I mentioned as well. But the humanitarian stuff, it's constantly at the back of my mind. I do a lot of community work in bar associations and different nonprofits, and that really goes towards the third bucket.
Yeah, very good. By the way, I don't know if any of the younger listeners, Sleepless in Seattle was a great movie that was romantic. It was a kind of rom com where two people met, and it was a very amusing story. And we'll get to your bird watching as well. You know, and Seattle is such a hotbed. I've got a lot of friends there. Of course, Amazon, a lot of tech, a lot of great startup there. So you have people that are companies coming to you and asking for help to get employees in. That's why you wrote the book, the Startup Visa, and it's just you just saw a great need for it, and there's lots of room to help them.
That's correct. And as in the last 10, 15 minutes, believe it or not, I was thinking to myself, you have to be close to a problem to be able to see the
Mm.
solution. And I was just on a call earlier where I was talking about the third bucket, and I was thinking to myself, why does this matter to me so much? And it's because I'm seeing those people with the problems day in, day out, and I know what the solution can be. But those people who are in the problem, don't appreciate how that solution could either help them, or they know but they don't know how to
Hmm.
advocate. And when I became a lawyer, I just wanted to be a lawyer. I didn't know lawyers could be so much more. But what really happened is I kept seeing these problems over and over again, and I realized that I have to be the voice for my client. And that's how all of this advocacy sort of snowballed into writing so frequently and writing a book. And, nobody tells you how to write a
Right.
book. You just like suddenly feel like, I've got to write a book. How do I do this? And you figure it out. And that's where discipline comes
Yes.
in, Joey. That's why I think I'm so drawn to everything that you've been doing.
Yeah. Let's talk about that shortly. And not only writing a book, but two podcasts, a lot of blogs. I got a chance to listen to some of your podcasts as well. I mean, what makes you do all that? I mean, you've got a law firm, you've got a husband, you've got two daughters, you've got, why do all this extracurricular? Is it passion? Is it love? Is it discipline?
That's a really good question. Sometimes I wonder what's wrong with me. but um, but I think what it is I feel so compelled to educate, inform, and
Mm,
change. And what I will say at the outset, so your listeners don't think that I don't sleep, I do
good.
sleep, and I do everything. In I create buckets for myself. I don't do everything at once, because at any given time there's just so much going on. What is the most important thing in that moment? And so for my podcast, I used to do a live radio show that was once a week, Tuesdays at 10 o'clock, and I would show up at a radio station, and everybody took care of everything, and I just, wow, I love doing this. This is so great. I didn't realize how spoiled I
Mm,
was that somebody just took care of all of that. I just showed up. But podcasting, as you know, Joey, is a labor of love. You really do it because you feel so compelled about a particular subject. And I think that's why I think your podcast is so important, because people don't appreciate discipline is one of the number one things that you need to have in your life if you want to see things change, move, have accomplishments. So why do I do it? Is because something within me says I must, and I just
hmm.
follow.
What's your largest challenge as the head of your firm? It's your own firm, and being a immigration attorney. What's your biggest challenge?
Not having enough
Time.
time. I want to do
Mm,
everything. I want to do everything. There was a time where I thought, well, I'm a lawyer, I shouldn't do X. I'm a lawyer, I shouldn't
mm,
do Y. I'm a lawyer, I shouldn't say something about blah, blah out aloud because I'm just a lawyer. But I think what has transpired is, why not
hmm,
me?
hmm.
And that's what I come to, like, I'm just going to talk about it. I'm going to do this. I'm going to write about it. And I used to have this notion that there's not enough time, and that is true. But if you want to do something, you make the
Hmm.
time. And I think what you have been arguing about and, advocating for and showing people is that if you want to do something, you make time
Yeah.
for it. And I think that's how I'm able to do it. But I think when I wrote my book Legal
Yeah.
Heroes during the
Yeah.
pandemic, and I was very compelled to write that book. I suddenly one day thought, I need to write this book because I don't know what's going to happen in 2020's election. I need to make sure people understand what lawyers have done, what
Hmm.
they can do should the need come up. And so it was on a very tight timeline. And I looked at my calendar, and remember, we were all in
Yes.
lockdown. My kids are having school at home and everybody's at home. Where am I going to do this? And I thought to myself, I have to wake up early. So I started to wake up at 4:30
Wow.
a.m. so I could draft my book and review and do all the things that were necessary. And in my mind, I said, it's only for 2 months. It's okay. I can do this. I feel so compelled. And I had a team to help me. But what happened after that is, oh, I can wake up at
Hmm.
4:30. Oh, that's where my time is. And granted, I have not been able to do that all the time. But what I have done is I wake up early. Invariably between 5:30, and the times that I sleep in, that my eyes are just so glued together, it becomes 6 something. But those morning hours are so
Yeah.
precious to me because I don't have, kids asking for things. I don't have my email just popping, making a noise every 2 seconds. I don't have the phone ringing. That's my time. And I've learned to love that time, embrace it, feel protective of it, really feel that all the things that you see, a lot of that happens during the morning where I'm planning or organizing and getting them in place.
Hmm. Yeah. When I asked you about your largest challenge, you said time. Does the law frustrate you the most? What frustrates you the most? I would assume it's the law itself.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it depends on which moment I'm in and which hat I have
Hmm.
on, but the law is frustrating. What I have realized is frustration within you can create so much negative
Right.
energy that then it transpires into everything else you do. And so, in the moment, yes, sometimes I'm stressed and I'm frustrated, and my clients are projecting, but I have really learned how to calm myself down and see, okay, I can only control what I can
Right.
control. I cannot control the law as it is. How can I control my clients' expectations? How can I solve this problem? That problem isn't going to be a one step. What are the 10 steps I need to do? Um, and then come and making sure, one of the biggest, not challenges necessarily, because I feel is part of what I should do, and I do in fact try to accomplish this, is making sure my clients are not anxious as
Hmm.
well. It's inherently an anxious process, particularly when it's going to take 10 years or whatever that timeline is. So much of your life is dependent on this visa. What I say is, I'm helping people with the most important things in their lives, their livelihoods or their loved
Hmm.
ones. And those two things inherently make you stressed and anxious. And when you have that and you have somebody helping you, you can't help but project that. And so what I've learned is I need to be 10 times calmer than usual so that I can project, I have the energy to project that calmness to
Hmm.
them. Because if they are stressed, again, they are going to project that
Right.
everywhere around them. It's going to affect their own work, their own families. So it's really something I've been working on during the COVID pandemic, because all of us were thrown into an unknown situation that prolonged, more than the 2 months that you and I
Yes.
anticipated. So how do you get through that? So anything that we can do as individuals to better ourselves is so important for everybody around you, as a human, as a professional.
And is one of your calming kind of you know, places to go and resources. Is that the bird watching and the photography?
Yes, I'm so glad you mentioned it. I feel as though initially I was like, oh, I shouldn't talk about birding, but I'm like, no, this is the whole me, and it's important. So what really happened was suddenly all of us are at home and it's so noisy. And in the previous administration's, immigration practices, I really had to find ways to keep my sanity. And I took on meditation. I took lessons and classes, but suddenly, when everybody's at home, there's no quiet spot to do it. So I would sit outside meditating or just standing to just take some deep breaths. And that's when I started to notice birds. But it was a simple sparrow, it was a simple sparrow. And I thought to myself, wow, I never really noticed how beautiful a sparrow is. We see these all the time, whether you pay attention or not, they're everywhere. But it was the beginning of taking notice of something right there in front of us that we walk by and never look at. And it really started with, like, maybe I'll take a picture of it with my cell phone. And I did, and I thought, oh, that wing shape is interesting. So I upped my game and used a camera that was, gathering dust for years. And I started to take pictures with those, and I started to really see something in me that, I was noticing beauty that I really never paid attention
Hmm.
to, and what that was doing to me. I would be outside for 10 minutes. I'll be like, oh, the world has walls in every direction, and my clients are going through so much. But I think I can do this. I can help them. I can be a better person. And that really snowballed into, like, oh, I can be a better person. How can I make myself a better person? Oh, what other birds are there? It really had a reciprocal effect of me looking for new birds and perfecting my photo into doing something that was helping me be better. And I have now become a huge advocate to say every professional, every leader, every human, in fact, needs an outlet that is purely for themselves. If you do not do something for yourself, you do not um, give yourself the love that you need to give
Hmm.
yourself to be able to project love everywhere else. And so when I go to these birding walks, I'm walking. I mean, you've talked about exercise and all sorts of other things, but, most of us will have the excuse that I don't have time. And yes, I'm still guilty of it, I have to say. But we don't have time. And exercise is like, you find something else that's more important, you procrastinate. But once you love something, all the things that are associated with that become part of your
Hmm.
life. I now have rain jackets that I never used to have. I have hiking boots and have different boots that I tested. Like, I'm now walking in the mud. I sometimes take pictures of myself in the mud thinking nobody would believe that I'm walking in the mud, you know? But it makes me so happy. And the happier I am, I've realized I can make other people
Hmm.
happier too.
Hmm. Yeah, just general happiness, and I know you talk a lot about love as well, and how important it is, and love breeds love, and happiness does the same thing. You mentioned discipline on the podcast. I talk a lot about it. I lost a lot of weight. People ask me how I did it. I had to kind of come to the rock bottom where the doctor said, you're not going to see your daughter graduate. And I started my tech firm in the '90s, and I gained all this weight, and I just turned everything around. But people ask me how I did it, like there's some secret, and I just say discipline. Discipline and focus. That's really what it took. I wonder how you use discipline in your life. Excuse me. Do you consider yourself, even as a youth, a disciplined person? I mean, going through law school, coming to the U.S., completely changing your environment. It takes a lot of change and a lot of change of habits and viewpoints and careers. I mean, where does discipline fall in your life, Tamina?
Well, first of all,
Oh.
congratulations on that, because I think it's a really big deal. And I've seen that with some close family members of mine. It is discipline. And discipline comes in so many different ways, but it's the intention
Mhm.
that sets everything. You made an
Hmm.
intention that you wanted to lose weight. And what you describe about having the tech job and putting on weight, it is so many
Yes.
people. So many people in this world, because we are stressed about doing that work and doing it to the best of
Mm,
our ability. But when we are doing it to the best of our ability, we're neglecting our own souls, our own selves. And when you do that, that's when you've really lost yourself, to really pay attention to the things that are most important. But we don't think that's important, because we've got to get the job
right.
done. We've got to work the 80 hours. We've got to meet that client need. But it's when you hit rock bottom, that's when you really feel that you've got to make that change. But why do we have to do
Mm,
that? And I think that's where your message is so important. I think that's where my message is so important. And that's why I think I want to talk about birding more and more. Because if we can change humans in the way they think of themselves, I think the world does become a better place. Because if you can love yourself, you will focus on what's important to you. And when that becomes important, egoless love
mm,
for yourself and others, then how can the world not be a better place? Why do we have so much decisiveness? Because we grow up with so much, trauma in our lives. Whether you acknowledge it or
right.
not, you have them. And it's the healing process that helps you then get to the shape that you want to be in, and it's mind, body, they're all connected. And you will perform better. And the people that come to you is because they see your success, and they want it for
Mm,
themselves. But a lot of people just don't believe it's the hard work and the discipline behind it. It is truly
mm,
simple if you could just focus on what is the most important thing for you. It doesn't have to be all day, though. I think that's the other
yeah.
myth. That's the other myth that people have. It's going to take so much time. It really doesn't. Standing on that deck for 10 minutes a day just to breathe and then take notice of the birds, that's how it began for me. But when you asked, how do I do all of this? It's because I'm able to prioritize, but in the priority, I'm also making sure that my morning routine is not compromised in any way. And so when I travel, for example, nowadays birding is the ulterior motive for
Good for you.
everything. That morning routine that I normally have at home, that goes into birding. Which
Hmm,
park am I going to? Which birds am I going to see? How clear is this picture going to be? And I think all of those things are very important. And so for me, discipline is all about making sure that my my needs are being met, so that I can be better for everybody
mm.
else.
Yeah, your first point, how discipline equals intention. I never quite made those connections. I always say kind of focus, and I get a relative amount of pushback how discipline, some people view discipline as militant, and there's no wrong or right answer, by the way. I don't claim to be the king of discipline. It's a vehicle that I use stronger in some areas and not in others. But tying it to intention is very, very interesting because I guess it's always been implied, but I never really thought of the two. When you're practicing uh law and you're talking to clients, I wonder if there's a certain amount of discipline that has to be involved on their part. They're probably very anxious. They're probably, they're coming to you with a problem and you have to solve it. I wonder how discipline plays a role there.
That's a really good point. And, offline, I'd love to chat more about, discipline and intention and all of those things. But let's take a client who is about to lose their job. This is the business immigration
Right.
bucket. And they have children with severe, health
Mm.
issues. And if they don't have a job, they don't
Oh,
have the health
oh,
insurance. And now there are other external factors that are affecting whether the job is going to remain or not. Think about the mindset. I mean, you're a father of
yes.
two. I'm a mother of two. I mean, once I became a parent, I became overnight an incredibly, you know, more understanding human being and a better lawyer. But what is that person looking
Mm,
for? Yes, they're looking for a legal solution, but they're also looking for somebody who
mm,
understands them, who can really, empathize with them and find the solution in an empathetic way rather than judging them for whatever that external factor is. Judgment is such an awful thing to
yes.
do. You just don't know what people are going through. So it boils down to love again. Often I will be like, oh my gosh, there's so much I have to do. And the thing that I have started to impart as well, because I'm like thinking like, how am I going to solve this? Is take the responsibility with love, discharge it with
Hmm.
love. Everything will fall into
Mm.
place. So for that client, making sure that they know that you understand them and you're going to do the best that you can is very important. Let them know what the risks are. Ultimately, it's their decision. One example is in the COVID pandemic situation where everybody got stopped wherever they were, you know, whichever country they were in. And I mean, there are so many different types of stories, but one person, they had filed their case in the United States, but they were traveling for a temporary period, but they immediately got stalled in that
Hmm.
spot in Southeast Asia, and they couldn't come back. And because they couldn't come back, and they couldn't come back because that country was closed down, the airplanes were grounded, people weren't vaccinated, you couldn't get a vaccine even if you tried. So many different reasons they couldn't come back. And because they were not here, their case was
Hmm.
denied. Now, these issues are often unprecedented. You know, we've dealt with so many different unprecedented issues. And so I'm like, how do I get this person back? And so I went into my network of, lawyers in different parts of different listservs. And everybody basically said, you've got to let this start again and the person has to stay outside the country. It felt inherently wrong to
Wow.
me that this person, this family is going to be split up because of no fault of their own. And so sometimes you have to use the law and do the thing that you think you have
Hmm.
to do. There's no there's no set example for it, but you've got to feel the law and see what can I do with that, making sure the client understands this may not work, but let's try it. And we tried it and it worked. And the client is about to come back, from being stuck outside the country for
Wow.
2+ years. But that doesn't happen often. So as a lawyer, understand your client to the best of your ability and do the best that you can as a lawyer to fix that
Hmm.
problem. And if it is not your expertise, refer the case to somebody who is a better fit than you. Quite often now I'll say that person is a better fit than me. Why? Because for the highest good of all, let's make sure that that problem is solved. I don't, it's not about money at that point. It's about solving that problem. And in law, in immigration law particularly, if a problem begins, you cannot solve it
Hmm.
easily. With time, the problem gets worse and worse and worse. And so, as a
Wow.
lawyer, immigration lawyer, where the livelihoods and loved ones are in my hands, the burden is a very heavy one, and I take it seriously. And that's why the evolution of birding in my life has become a paramount
Mm.
part of it, to make sure that I can be healthy and happy in my mind and body, to give the best self I can give to everybody around me.
So important to have those outlets. When you were describing the process to write your book, you said, "Well, I decided to wake up early, and it was very, everybody, the house was quiet, and I had time." It reminds me of, okay, once I had to lose weight, I stopped drinking anything with sugar in it. That was it. And I didn't tell anybody.
Mhm.
I just did it, and it was wonderful. And then, I still had a hamburger. I didn't have two though. I had one. I cut everything in half, and just no more sugar drinks. Just those simple things. You know, when you visit somewhere, park your car far away, so you have to walk a little bit. Don't take any more elevators. Take the stairs. Simple things like this involve discipline, but you just accept it and move on, just like you did, and you're able to accomplish those goals.
I agree. And the one of the profound moments in my birding journey was that I had to walk through this nature park. It's a wildlife refuge, and it was a 3.5 mile loop. And I didn't pay attention to the notices and everything, but I got to the end of that three and a half
Hmm.
mile loop, and then that entrance was closed. So you actually have to walk 3.5 miles
Wow.
back to get. And so I'm like, I walked all the way back, and I was like, I didn't think anything of it. It was basically 7 miles. And of course, there was some other mileage for the, walking to the
Sure.
car and all of that. But it dawned on me, wow, I just walked 7 miles without complaining. I was happy as a clam. I didn't even notice how much time had gone by. I could stay there for another 2 hours easily. And imagine what that did to my
Yes.
health, let alone like my mindset. But I didn't notice it, I didn't notice it in the same way. And what I've realized is once you love something, that physical activity that comes with it, you don't notice it
Hmm.
anymore. And so, we went to Universal Studios for spring break this year as 2022
Great.
has opened up. So we finally went to Florida. There's a lot of
Yes, there
walking that
is. I've been there
happens
many
at these
times.
theme
A lot of
parks.
walking. Yes.
I am very proud to tell you, I did not complain for a single second. Everybody in the family did, but pre-birding, I would have been the
Good
first
for you.
person to
Good for you.
complain. I would have asked to sit down, and I said to my husband, "Did you notice?" I did not complain. And I even, I woke up at 5. I went and caught the sunrise at some park. I walked around for 2 or
Good
3
for you.
hours. I came back and I'm like, okay, we're going to a theme park. So I had already walked a
Good for
lot,
you.
before was even walking with them. And so it's little, but it didn't happen in one day. It's very much what you
Yeah.
say. Do little
Yes.
bits, the sugar. And there's a book called Atomic
Yep.
Habits. It's like doing one thing and you build on it and you build on it. You do that one thing and then you don't even notice that's part of your day. Waking up at 4:30 a.m., I have to tell you, was not easy
Right.
in and of itself. I had to change my body clock. I really had to change my body clock because I would stay up late after the kids would go to sleep, and that was my quiet time. But by then, I am exhausted. My mind, body is like fighting
Right.
to stay up. I was not necessarily doing my best thinking, which I didn't know at the time. But as I changed and I realized I got to get some sleep, I have to refresh my mind. That's how I changed the body clock, and I am very careful not to mess
Hmm.
with that, because if I have slept in over the weekend, Monday becomes difficult. Yes, I'll snooze the button many times, and my husband's not happy about that, but it's the only way that works for me. But it's the small things. Once you've done one habit, you can add to another, to another, to another, and it becomes part of your life.
Absolutely. Yeah. When I started working out, I did all 6 a.m. classes. So I was up at 5:30 and I went and, I did it about 7 months in a row without missing a day. You just get into that habit. You mentioned Atomic Habits, one of my favorite books. My biggest takeaway from the book is to kind of couple a habit with a good habit. So if you want to start flossing, for example, do it right after you brush your teeth. You already have some kind of habit, couple it with another, and then it just becomes a routine. Very, very good advice. Tamina Watson, what motivates you?
Being blessed and loved by the universe. It motivates me because I feel as though I have been blessed with so much in life. And yes, everybody goes through hardships. It's how you deal with
Hmm.
them. But it's all about love of other human beings and how you can make things a little bit better than they were before you. And so, what motivates me is love for human beings and to make sure that I do my part in this story that we're living in, this journey that we're all taking, to leave my impact.
Like to soak that in for a moment. It's wonderful. How do you measure success?
How I can spread love.
And when that's done, when you do it, there's no greater sense of enjoyment. There's no, when someone's upset around me and I do my best to just love and just let's sit back and let's think about what's happening here, and everybody kind of comes to a similar level. I mean, there's nothing more rewarding that in my view.
And I absolutely agree with you. I mean, love is I'm demonstrating love in every single action I
Hmm.
take. So whether it's writing, whether it's the book, whether it's the podcast, whether it's sitting with my clients, whether it's sitting with my team, my family, my children, I think the key word, and it's really something I've written about recently, is that Martin Luther King was so right about love. And, it becomes a cliche because you hear it so much. But if you can internalize what he was trying to say, that is what the universe is about. And if we can embrace it, implement it in everything we do, we no doubt make ourselves better, but we make everything around us better.
And nothing negative could happen there. We can, with so many societal ills that are around us right now, just some love, taking a step back and just having a little love would do everybody a world of good. Tahmina Watson, what an absolute pleasure speaking with you. I was excited when I knew we were going to talk, and just an absolute pleasure. How can we get in touch with you?
Well, Joey, it's been a pleasure of mine too, because I was so looking forward to speaking with you. And I know the message that you're trying to send is really going to do what we're all trying to accomplish, you and me, about making the world a better place, because it starts with the individual. And that's what you're trying to do. So I'm grateful that there is a messenger like
Hmm,
you out there. My website is www.watsonimmigrationlaw.com, and my email contact information is there. One of the best ways to connect is through LinkedIn. It's, you can see everything that I'm doing, but I'm on Twitter and Instagram. I use Instagram to often send my
it's great.
pictures as opposed to like all the, and then I use Twitter to send out the articles I've written, and LinkedIn is where everything else I'm doing. I mean, it's just a good, great place to share so people can connect.
Yeah, Instagram has the bird photos and everything. It's wonderful. Tamina, by the way, is spelled Tahmina, and Watson is Watson. I'll put it all in the show notes. Tamina, thank you so much. I have friends in the Northwest in Seattle. We usually make it there in the summer. It'd be great if we could all get together and have a cup of coffee and watch some
I would
birds.
love
Yes, that would
that.
be great.
Yes, I would love that. I have actually I've looked crazy when I go to different places and I don't have time. I'd be like, "Hey, do you want to go on a 5 a.m. walk with me? That's my only time to meet." And so in a party environment, they'll be like, "Yes, we'll do that." And then day off, they're like, "It's a little too early, Tanita." So I'm going to hold you to it,
I would
Joey.
absolutely love it. Tamina, thanks again for your time. You be well.
You too. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pin's Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. There's like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pin's Discipline Conversations.